Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm delighted to be here today with Sarah Pomeranz, who is the founder of Consultants for Impact. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Will. I'm excited to be here.
So, Sarah, why don't you give us kind of the quick overview of what Consultants for Impact does?
Absolutely. So Consultants for Impact was really born out of my own struggle as a early career Accenture strategy consultant who was going through the ranks, especially during COVID. I think many of us experienced a bit of existential crisis or two during that period of time as our work shifted from being very travel driven to being a little bit more perhaps isolated and at home. And I was feeling really excited and energized by the corporate client facing work that I was able to do, but also just recognize this dissonance between the types of problems that I was solving within my day job at Accenture, and then a lot of the problems that I was discussing at a broader societal level with my friends and my family when I'd eventually get to log off in the afternoons, evenings, and weekends. And I was really just trying to figure out how can I use this same toolkit that I really believe in. I'm a pragmatist at my core. How can I use like hypothesis driven problem solving, but to try to address some of the world's most pressing problems, everything from pandemics to climate crises to, democracy preservation, things like that. But I felt like there was a lack of people really applying our business skill set to those problems and a real need and opportunity to have an outsized impact when that did happen. And so I took a 1 year leave of absence from Accenture to try to figure out what is the best pathway for someone with my generalist skill set to make a big difference. And along the way, learned about lots of different organizations and opportunities that someone with my skills could take advantage of to have an impact. And instead of just taking one of those jobs myself, I decided to help other folks in my circumstance try to accelerate their journey and process to those high impact opportunities. So we've been around for 3 to 4 years now and worked with over 1,000 current former corporate consultants all over the world on figuring out what are their core values, what is the most important problem that they could plug into, and then crucially, what are the organizations and teams that are really going to value that strategy, data-driven consultant toolkit for having as much of an impact as possible.
So you're in sort of, I guess my language would be you're helping consultants from large global firms who want to transition into the nonprofit world. You're helping them figure out how to do that, giving them some coaching on that, it sounds like.
Definitely, that's one exit opportunity that we support consultants transitioning into. We're somewhat, I would say, legal form agnostic in terms of the destination, because we think there are some teams inside of large for-profits. Like, for example, there are some of the teams at Anthropic. A lot of folks, I'm sure, listening to this podcast have heard about Claude or used Claude themselves, that we think are especially high leverage opportunities for consultants. So we'll work with large companies or teams within large companies too. It's really about whether we think they're addressing a really important problem and one in which it's relatively neglected for a consultant to go into it, right? So we're not typically helping consultants land industry, roles or VC or private equity. They're often more off the beaten path than that.
Okay. So walk me through the process or the syllabus or the roadmap. A consultant hears about you, says, okay, I'm interested in that. They register on your website or they do something, and tell me the process of what happens then. Is it one-on-one? Is it self-guided? Is there synchronous? Is there in person? Just walk me through the whole kind of process of how you would work with someone.
Absolutely. So we do have resources on our website that are completely asynchronous. If anyone was curious to check out our career check-in template, it's the new year, it's still Q1. So if you're doing some of that career planning and you want to do a bit of a step back, that's a great free resource that we offer. But we'd be pretty excited for anyone who's interested in impact, especially, and a former or current consultant, member of the Umbrex community or otherwise, to apply for a career conversation on our website. That's kind of the first step in our core offering, so to speak, and you'll be matched with a former consultant. I mean, that's a big part of our model it's a peer-to-peer approach as opposed to like professional certified coaches. We are all former corporate consultants who have transitioned into the social impact field broadly ourselves. So we're coming with a bit of a different flavor and lens. And you'll be prompted to engage with a bunch of videos, podcasts, readings that we curate depending on your level of interest in maximizing your social impact versus maybe satisficing, or you're just saying like impact is a part of my career, but maybe not my priority at the moment, as well as, your background, right? So if you come from more of a data science or operations, perhaps type of consulting background, we'll try to curate the resources to be most relevant to you. And you'll do that at self-paced and fill out a bunch of reflection prompts around your values, around what are the problems you think that are most important, what has given you energy in previous roles, what have you found draining. And then you'll meet one-on-one with myself or a member of my team. We're a pretty lean team at the moment, but growing quickly. So we have five staff at the moment. And then you'll have a one-on-one conversation. We'll talk about what are your key uncertainties, what are the challenges that you're facing, and provide some insight as to what other consultants with your background have done in order to overcome them. And we'll probably also share some more introductions, resources, point you to events, credentialing, courses, skill building, things that you can do. And then you join the Consultants for Impact community, which means that you'll have access to a lot of opportunities which may or may not be published publicly of, high impact organizations who are looking for a chief of staff or a COO, and they reach out to us before, or maybe they never go public with the role. And by applying for a career conversation and being a part of our ecosystem, then we get to keep you in mind for those opportunities when they arise as well. And we also host events and retreats and things like that you'd have access to. But the real core journey is that, peer support and introductions, targeted introductions to other consultants who have already taken the leap, and specialists in fields that you want to learn more about. Like maybe that's biosecurity, maybe that's alternative proteins, maybe that's about, malaria, tuberculosis. We have, our network is really deep in these global cause areas. And so that's where I think we can help people the most.
Okay. So the first step is someone would sign up and have a career conversation.
Yep.
And then what are you trying to get to the person by the end of that 1 hour career conversation? What sort of, either questions, or is there kind of a structured approach that you have to that, and then when someone finishes that, what's kind of the map of if they're trying to move into the impact sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, this is a very personalized process. So it's going to depend really heavily on where you're starting with, but maybe I could give you an example to make it a bit more real of what one could look like depending on the starting place. So let's say you're an independent consulting who's impact curious is a one way to put it. You've always been interested in doing more about, the problems you read about in the news, but you just don't know where to start and you're not really sure where your skills can best fit in. So one message we'll probably try to convey to you is that your career is a really, really important tool, maybe the most important tool you have available to you as a consultant or former consultant in making the world a better place. I think a lot of people think about, the power of the purse. What are the things that you buy? Maybe it's your vote. Maybe it's, I don't know, recycling or something to that effect. But we'll try to build the argument that really the 90,000+ hours that you spend working is like the greatest tool you have in your toolkit to try to make the world better. And so it's worth it to spend the time trying to find those opportunities. And the next message we'll probably try to convey is there's lots of folks who would love to hire you. You may not feel that way all the time because a lot of the news is pretty doom and gloom around the labor market. And, a lot of folks have frozen hiring, et cetera. But we broke our own records in terms of proactive organizations reaching out to us for consultant talent last year. So a lot of times it's just kind of reinforcing the message that actually your skill of being a phenomenal project manager, operations specialist, et cetera, is really in demand. And here are a bunch of folks in our network who've already made the transition. So we can make this real to you. Here's somebody who was in your shoes a year ago, who's now a COO at this organization. And then maybe you're just like, well, I just don't know where to start. So we'll kind of start to ask you some questions about, what are some underlying assumptions that you have about problem areas that you would be excited to work on. One framework we like to lean pretty heavily on that we borrowed from a peer organization is called the SELF framework, and we borrowed it from Probably Good. So the S stands for, is the problem at a high level of significance? Is it a big problem? E is for efficacy. So do we believe that this specific intervention is credible at solving that problem? F is, or L is for leverage, right? So is this the kind of role within an organization or team where you're going to be able to have an outsized effect? Because even if the problem is massive and the intervention is really incredible, if you're in a role that's kind of at the periphery, it's probably not where you can have the most impact. And then the last piece is fit, which is kind of what everyone starts with when it comes to job search, where they're just like, I want to find a team where I love the people and the work is interesting. But for us, that's the last piece. It has to be there, but oftentimes you want to ensure that those three things are in place to find a role that's going to be, like a moonshot level of impact.
All right. So the naive approach, someone who is, has just received kind of just general purpose job search guidance. Someone would say, let's say they haven't heard of consultants for impact and they just decide they want to get into nonprofit. You would probably say, what am I interested in? Oh, I really care about climate change or social justice or immigrant rights or whatever your thing is. Research nonprofits in that space and start, seeing if you know anybody there or just reaching out to some affinity, like maybe someone from your consulting firm works there, someone in your college or, someone that ask for, just a informational discussion, right? Just do a normal job search, right? Except focus on that sector. What are some of the more, sophisticated approaches or that are more attuned to the sector that would be additive to that, naive strategy?
Baseline.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, the consultants for impact philosophy will push you on every step that you just outlined right there, starting from should you just go and pursue the problem area that you have always been maybe personally interested in or passionate about. And we'll try to get you to think really critically about what are the problem areas where someone with your skill set could have the most impact. We focus a lot on this notion of it's a baseball term. I'm not sure if you're a baseball fan, but I'm from Boston, so I kind of have to. I don't have a choice, or I felt like I didn't have a choice. There's a term called VORP, value over replacement player, which essentially says that, right, your value as a new player on the team is dependent not just on how good you are, but how much better you are than the person who would have filled your shoes. And that's something we push a lot of consultants on who, maybe it feels like the easiest thing to do is I'm going to go become a strategy and ops person at a CO2, like a climate startup or something, is often a starting place maybe that a lot of folks come to us with. And we'll really push folks to say that is a great intention and it's coming from a place to want to have, an intellectually stimulating career, to work on a problem that really matters. Like all of those intentions are right. But who do you think the next candidate is going to be if they don't hire you for that role? I'd argue it's probably someone with pretty much exactly your skill set and background, that they have a long line of former BCG consultants that are applying for that role. If you instead are open to looking at unusual organizations and problem areas, things like I'm going to work in a policy think tank where I'm the only person with a business skill set who's joining the team, where I could potentially really influence something as influential as just say like AI governance at this moment is a really hot topic and a really important one to ensure we get right. You could be the only person with any ops and project management skill set on that team, and you could really ensure that an organization which otherwise maybe would have had middling results actually really influences the policy conversation. And we've seen that happen. This is not just like a hypothetical, right? We've seen those hires and how they change the entire culture and effectiveness of an org. And that's just one example, but it's true, I think, at every level. So it's true at the problem level. Are we thinking really intentionally about what the problem is we're choosing? Are we thinking really thoughtfully about the interventions, right? Like to your point, a lot of folks are just like impact, nonprofit equals impact. But there's lots of nonprofits out there, which we know we're able to stay around for a long time without much evidence of having that much impact. And that's because nonprofits' value chain is broken in a way that businesses and for-profits aren't, right? If you're a restaurant that sells bad food, good luck sticking around for a while unless you're a front for something else. But if you are a nonprofit, as long as you can convince your funders that you're doing good work, then you could stick around for a long time without having much impact, which is why we work with a lot of partners who are third-party independent evaluators who are assessing whether the organizations are able to accomplish what they set out to do. So this is kind of the level of insider baseball, so to speak, that we play in terms of trying to really find the opportunities for folks in which you can have a much higher degree of confidence that you're landing, really, really crucial jobs.
Huh. Tell us about the types of roles that consultants have the skill sets for, and maybe also just give us some sense of, compensation level so people can think about, is that something that I can afford to do?
Yeah, is it viable? Absolutely. Yeah, so you put some in some different buckets. I think my favorite, probably unsurprising to you, Will, is like the entrepreneur is a really incredible role that I think consultants are unusually strong fits for. And we do work with several incubators and accelerators that start at the founder level pre-idea. So if you're like me and maybe haven't founded anything, even though you'd be excited about it because you're like, I don't have the idea yet, we'd still love to chat with you because we know a bunch of places that actually match folks with ideas and other founders. Entrepreneurs really kill on that VORP stat because often the next best person just is no one. Like nobody's going to found the thing if you don't found it. And so you can have a lot of impact by building initiatives. So we have members of our network who have, started for-profit startups they pledge with Founders Pledge, which is a great organization that they're going to donate a bunch of the profit. But it's functionally looks just like a for-profit startup on the outside. We have founders who have started organizations called like the AI Underwriting Coalition, AIUC, which is like an insurance startup for frontier AI models to try to de-risk some of the privacy and other concerns that companies would have in applying and integrating agents into their enterprise activities. We have folks who have founded organizations focusing on congenital syphilis in the Philippines. So there's a wide range is the main thing I would want to articulate to folks. But that's just one bucket. If entrepreneurship's, maybe you don't have the risk appetite for that, and not everyone does. Chief of staff is another very common role that's true, exists in the for-profit sector and also exists in many nonprofit organizations. Consultants love the task variety, right? And that you get to work really closely with a super smart principal, chief operating officer, ops director, operations manager, those roles. I think policy is relatively neglected amongst a lot of folks coming out of consulting, but we have a good number of folks in our ecosystem who have gone on to be policy managers or researchers. The skill set that we develop in consulting around synthesizing information, like long reports that we then try to bubble up our executive summary bullets for a client. A lot of that is really transferable for policymakers as well, and bringing people together to have conversations is a lot of the client management, stakeholder management skills. So policy is a whole other area. Product manager, PM. I mean, a lot of times the roles will look somewhat similar to the for-profit sector, but just within a nonprofit player. Maybe the last bucket I would say is around grant makers working for foundations. There's a lot of activity at large foundations and really exciting field building work in which you can basically, one foundation that we work closely with called Coefficient Giving really did some incredible stewardship around lead exposure. And they basically have just, multiplied the amount of global funding that's going towards this area. And really, it was a couple people inside that foundation who championed that internally. Okay, so now the money talk, which is, I think, the scary part for many folks when they think about impact. I think one thing I'll say, I guess, first and foremost, that I really appreciate about independent consulting, and I would guess the audience of this podcast, is that these are folks who have already kind of thought about some of the trade-offs between just pure income increase maximization and other things they value, like agency and autonomy, right? Like a lot of folks, I'm guessing, who've joined Umbrex, worked at corporate consulting firms, and got off that really clear trajectory of, I'm going to at the next level make this much more, and the next level I'll make this much more, in the interest of having more autonomy and agency over what are the projects they work on and being their own boss.
It's actually not necessarily a trade-off. So it actually can go either way. So transitioning from a global management consulting firm into independent consulting, it's possible your income could be matched. It might go down, but it's actually possible to earn more because the fees that you're charging, it's not like 75% going to the firm. So
Margin. Yeah,
so
that makes
people
sense.
not necessarily a trade-off.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And I think that's then really similar in many ways to what I would say about the impact space. I think you're pretty much guaranteed that you won't be increasing your income unless you do the at least like progression, like rate of growth, unless you go the route that I mentioned in which you're doing more of a founding to give thing, right? Where you're going to start a for-profit startup and then donate a bunch as a mechanism of having impact. But for me, my non-negotiable, right? You just need to be really clear about what your non-negotiables are. I wasn't willing to take a cut, so I stayed at the same level as when I exited, and I mostly just was sacrificing future increases in earnings. But it was worth it to me to wake up every day working on problems that I felt were really important, and that didn't have I kind of was able to shed the cognitive dissonance between my work and my values, and that's going to be different on a per person basis, and people have different feelings about it. But there's a range. There are folks in our network who have taken considerable cuts and gone down to, pretty bare bones salaries in the interest of the impact. And there are folks in our network who have, making high six-figure salaries, still working at a foundation or working in emerging tech, policy think tank. It really does vary. So if you're somebody who's like, I couldn't possibly entertain this because I have to still make, at least 200K, there are opportunities that we could, that we've matched folks to that are in that range. So we'd still be excited to chat with folks. I think just like most things are at least some degree of trade-off. Maybe with independent consulting, you're trading the variability, right? That there is some degree of like the business will go up and down. So
No, I'm sorry. When you say for foundations, someone could be earning like high six figures, you mean they're earning more than $500,000 a year at a foundation?
normally that would only be like if you were the executive director of a large nonprofit, it's probably the high end.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's possible. Foundations, yeah, I think probably much more common. Like in the 100, 200, 300
Wow.
K range. But yeah, I don't know. I think that some folks reach some degree of financial independence depending on what phase of your career, and then you're optimizing for different things. And that's a lot of the folks that we speak to. Maybe their partner is the high earner. Maybe, it's just not their priority at this phase of their career in the same way.
Sure.
And you have to take it into account. It's a job at the end of the day. But I think it's just about being explicit about what the trade-offs are. I think a lot of us, at least myself, when I was in corporate consulting, I think I wasn't being fully honest with myself about the trade-offs I was making in the interest of high salary. And so
Yeah.
we just want folks to really be looking at it with open eyes. And then whatever answer you get to, that's probably the right answer.
Tell us about any tips that you have as people prepare their collateral, their resume or bio or LinkedIn profile or any of that. Are there any things that someone should do differently when they're preparing that collateral for the impact world, for the nonprofit world?
Yeah. It's hard for me to speak for the entire nonprofit world because obviously it's a diverse ecosystem. But I do think there's like maybe a bit more of an imperative to be really, really thoughtful about working on the most core and cruxy, so to speak, issues that a client is facing. When I was at Accenture, I worked in the nonprofit and the state government, sector for a while. And one thing that was hard for me was I could tell that we were motivated to just upsell, on a regular basis. And that, especially leadership, the goal was just how do we ensure that we can keep this partnership going, even if there wasn't mission critical work to be done. And so that's one push, I think, for independent consultants who are excited about working in the mission driven space is approaching it from a perspective of genuinely, like, how can I solve the most important problems that my resource constrained client is facing, because it is a very different dynamic than working for just other profit optimizing firms. And I think that there's also just like a lot of trust that can be earned by coming from that perspective. And that goodwill is I think it's intrinsically important, but also instrumentally helpful in landing and securing clients. In the ecosystem that we operate in, there's definitely a discomfort with people being too salesy. So one thing that we coach a lot of consultants on with our partners is trying to be pretty calibrated in how they portray their experience. In consulting, we're really rewarded for being persuasive and our storytelling skills. But depending on the nonprofit you're going to, I would argue like some of the best nonprofits are pretty skeptical of folks who are coming in touting a lot of accomplishments. And so, ways in which you can just really demonstrate impact and be pretty brass tacks about that and come with the numbers ready and like specifically how did you do the job differently than somebody else would have. I think that also builds a lot of trust and makes you a much more credible partner.
Okay. Um, I'm curious about how, with your organization, you've, managed to get inflow of opportunities from nonprofits of, when they're looking for jobs, even if, even if you're not charging them, it takes some effort to break through people's attention and to get noticed. And how have you been going about reaching out to nonprofits? I mean, it does usually require people don't just find you online, right? You got to reach out somehow.
Yeah.
So, how have you been doing that process of reaching out to nonprofits to make them aware of your offering?
Absolutely. Well, it definitely helped for me personally that remember I was on this journey of trying to figure out how I could have the most impact myself. And so I was kind of initially doing my own job search, so to speak, and reaching out to organizations and building relationships with people to try to gain clarity for my own search of what is the most impact I could possibly have with my career. So early on, it was, just earnest relationship development and exploring where I was interested, going to conferences in which there was just a really high quantity of organizations working on areas that I thought were important, right? So maybe that was food system reform and animal welfare. It was global health and development and some of these other cause areas. And then, candidly, a lot of organizations are really excited about getting former corporate consultants inside these roles. And maybe I would have thought that it was harder. I think I was surprised in some ways how much demand there was once we kind of got the reputation of, hey, if you reach out with a role, we will send you a curated list of the top 10 to 20 folks in our network who we think would be a good match.
Mm.
And then you start to get a reputation of having really quality referrals, high quality referrals. And that flywheel started to take effect and has really taken off. And so now we find ourselves saying no more often than yes in terms of the roles that we're willing to support, whether they meet our bar of impact. But it really did start with a place of just earnest relationship building and also coming from a place of curiosity about their work.
What sort of things do you say no to now?
Like what type of roles do we say no
Yeah.
to? I think a lot of roles in which the organization, right, if they haven't been evaluated by these third party evaluators and we can't speak to the efficacy of their intervention, I feel kind of uncomfortable matching consultants to those roles because I feel like, we have a promise and an understanding with our consultants that we're going to do our homework on our end to ensure that the organizations are doing high impact work. Or if we think the role is just not the right fit for our ecosystem. So a lot of times there isn't really a parallel consultants for impact that I know of. And please do reach out if you exist for lawyers or for accountants or for architects. And sometimes organizations will reach out to us and be like, we need a compliance manager. And we just don't actually have the right network for that all the time, especially if you need someone who's not just a savvy generalist who can pop in and figure it out, but you want someone who's been there before a bunch of times. So, yeah, it's about just trying to maintain that bar for fit.
Interesting. Okay. And how about the consultants? What have you done to, reach out to make people aware of your offering? Because that's
Yeah,
not easy, even if you're not charging people, just to
true.
get
Time.
awareness.
Time is the most valuable resource to our ecosystem, as I'm sure you know. Consultants do not give that away cheaply. I mean, I think early days, it was a lot of, hey, I'm a consultant who's also trying to figure this out. So, right, also appealing to that personal dynamic. For the first 2 years of running Consultants for Impact, I was really of the mindset of we're trying to find product market fit. And we're not sure. We weren't yet confident in what we were offering. So it was a lot of word of mouth. Who do I know? Who knows, who are Accenture former colleagues and who do they know? Who are people I know from undergrad or other phases of my life, and building it out really organically, and then getting, positive referrals. But nowadays we do also we try to partner with other ecosystems like Umbrex to get in front of where consultants already are and say, hey, we are a free resource that are available to you on top of all of the amazing support that you're getting from Umbrex or from other similar peers. And yeah, why not take advantage of it? And I think there's like a surprising number of consultants who have this internal voice that's telling them, I want to do more, but I just don't know if I can, or I'm just looking for someone to tell me that it's okay to want something different than what everyone around me is doing. And so a lot of our ads just have very high conversion because just telling consultants like, hey, we're a free resource of former consultants, and we'd be excited to chat with you about your career strategy. Yeah, I think does have a decent amount of fit for consultants who are excited about self-discovery through conversation, maybe more so than always just like, I could read the article or I could watch the video, but will I spend the time on it? I'm not sure.
Where do you place ads?
Most of our ads, we just started last year experimenting, and it's predominantly LinkedIn and Meta. LinkedIn, higher fidelity of the people who we reach are often better matches for our offering, but Meta's cheaper. We've experimented with Reddit a little bit, but I don't think we've quite landed the messaging for Reddit, since none of us are, I think, chronically online enough, unfortunately, to fully understand what hits there. But yeah, I would love to, do more semi-organic experiments on like Fishbowl or other consultant internal platforms. But since none of us are on the firm accounts anymore, it's a little bit harder.
I see. Um, Tell me a bit about the different third-party platforms and how you would recommend someone, like which specific third-party platforms do you recommend someone use if they want to investigate a nonprofit to see, how impactful it is?
Like evaluators. Yeah. Yeah. So, some organizations that we work with, a lot of them are foundations. So it's not always the most publicly available information, unfortunately, because often the people who are best situated to do deep evaluation and, sometimes it's as thorough as an academic randomized control trial, depending on the organization and what their intervention is. Yeah, the folks who typically have the most resources are foundations who are not always publicly sharing those evaluations either, unfortunately. But I think like a lot of the donation platforms, so charity evaluators is a great one if you're interested in like animal charities and nonprofits. They have a lot of recommendations for super high impact organizations. Giving What We Can does evaluations as well. And those are really donor facing, but you can use them as dual purpose because they're not going to recommend organizations that are not really doing incredible work. So yeah, but we'd also be, of course, if this is the kind of thing people are interested in exploring further, definitely happy to share with folks too, the organizations that are highest from a recommendation perspective with the evidence base behind them.
Okay. So you've partnered with some of the foundations, I imagine some of the ones that fund you, and they have these internal databases of nonprofits, the ones that they've looked at.
Yeah, nonprofits and also teams, like I said, on for profits. I think it's important to reinforce like we don't view things from a lens of nonprofit or for profit. We're really trying to figure out what are the organizations and teams within organizations that are having this outsized effect. So, one, we've worked with government bodies who are trying to spin up teams really quickly, and we think, wow, this is an incredible opportunity to influence an entire, government budgets, as you know, are massive, right? Can be huge. So if we can help get a bunch of consultants on an early stage team inside, this nation's government, that could be a really phenomenal opportunity for impact. So yeah, we work across sectors in that way, but definitely having these foundation partners helps as well.
So if you were going to, advise a friend on how to evaluate the impact of a nonprofit,
Yeah.
And they don't have access to one of these foundations, what are the
Yeah.
publicly available tools they should be thinking about using, and what are the different metrics or categories that you suggest someone look at when they're evaluating to try to sense how impactful is this nonprofit?
Yeah, I think one thing that is maybe the most important that I would advise any friend on is picking the problem area really thoughtfully and focusing on specifically like how large is the problem that they're trying to address. Because you could be the world's most effective stray cat shelter in Kiev, but the biggest win that you could possibly have is just not likely to compare from a lives impacted perspective with the world's most effective tuberculosis R&D organization. So trying to figure out what is the burden, right, of the problem that they're trying to address, and starting from that place is really important. And that's true from a professional lens also, right? So picking problems that are really, really significant from a lives touched perspective, and then trying to assess, okay, is this a problem that is relatively neglected, right? So, breast cancer, huge lives touch impact perspective, but there's actually a lot of resources already going towards breast cancer research. And so the marginal value that I can have in the space is somewhat diminished compared to, let's say, preventing the next nuclear disaster, because there's just way fewer people who are working on that problem, unfortunately, and we need a lot more people in the space. And so trying to find those opportunities that are a combination of, really high upside if they go well, but maybe aren't getting the level of attention and resources at the moment. Those are really good signs. And of course, the last piece of if they have an external evaluator, that's really, the best in class standard. But you're going to want to ensure that they're not just bragging about vanity metrics, right? Like number of workshops held or outcomes metrics versus real impact metrics. Like, this is why we believe that we are making a real significant difference in this problem. And here's how we know that.
Amazing. So, Sarah, if a listener wants to learn more about Consultants for Impact, maybe request a career conversation, where do you point them online?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Will. Yeah, we'd be really excited to hear from the Umbrex community and the Unleashed listenership as well. You can find us on consultantsforimpact.org. And I'm excited. I think we're going to be hosting a workshop with you all on the 26th around career theory of change on February 26th. So would be excited to meet some folks there as well.
Great. All right. Sarah, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Will. This has been so fun.